maneuver.
Stay on target.
We're too close.
Stay on target.
Let's blow this thing and go home.
I may have been a little bit too young to watch Star Wars in the movie theatre, however, it was the very first movie I watched on VHS, and ever since that time, watching Luke battle and blow up the Death Star, I've been fascinated with Star Wars. So when the opportunity came around to create a serving board with a Lego Star Wars theme, I jumped at it. This involved designing some 3D elements and 3D printing them. Here I've got my first prototype, so I printed this in clear PLA and it's just checking to make sure that these bricks stick, and they do, so that tolerance all works pretty well. So here's the finished version printed in grey PLA. As you can see, that looks a lot nicer in that grey, and I've added the brick structure to the back here, so when this comes in into this space here, it will have resin up the side, so you'll be able to see that visibly as well. So we've got our little X-wing here. It does have a little brick here, so that will mean that this will be able to stick down on here. So what I'm going to do is going to be using all these different parts here, which are real Lego, and they will be used to sort of join these pieces together and make something which looks like the Death Star trench. And we can't have the X bit too high. Now the other piece I was going to do, I couldn't find you can get clear and blue, but I couldn't find a red, so X-Wings fire a red shot. So I've 3D printed this little tube. I do need to give it sand down because 3D printing is pretty good, but sometimes it's not 100% accurate with its tolerances, so I need to give it a bit of a sand down. And what that means is I'll be able to have this one come out of this gun here, and maybe I'll have one sticking so it looks like it's gonna head into the tube here like so. That's going to be obviously the blowing up of the Death Star. Actually really pleased at how this is coming out. So good that my 3D printer is doing a pretty good job. These blocks are looking pretty awesome. I do have to wait for my resin supplies to turn up, and that's probably not going to be till next week. So this is going to be probably a project that takes me 2 or 3 weeks to complete. By the time you see the video, it's kind of over a 3-week period. So I already had this templated Macrocarpa serving board, rough cut, and now it was time to embed the 3D print and that Lego into it. So I was able to set a depth stop so that I didn't go too far through the board, and then just went and created lots of little cuts to be able to knock those out. So as you can see at this stage, it's not looking too pretty, but we're going to fix that with a router and set that router depth. Now it does mean I have to get pretty close to cutting right through this board just to be able to get the right depth. You won't believe how much sanding I had to do for this project. Hours and hours of sanding. So it's the worst part really of any woodworking project. Talk to any woodworker and everyone hates it in the end. But it's a necessary evil, and so here I'm just sanding this bit down, ready for some PVA glue to be able to go and stick in the 3D printed tray. just used a standard PVA glue for this part. Essentially it's pretty good at bonding wood and plastic, so no reason to use anything else apart from something that's tried and true. So use some clamps here to be able to try to get the plastic to stick to the wood along the walls, and it worked okay for most of the areas. There's a few bits which didn't 100% stick, but they got filled in with resin anyway. One day I'd love to be doing these sorts of projects full time, however at the moment with work and family I've only really got the weekends, and so it was the following weekend where I could take the clamps off and move on to the next stage of this project.
Let's blow this thing and go home.
So that's all glued in now, but I need to start filling this with resin, and I need to block off these two edges. So I'm going to use this old, it was a mini roller plastic, cut out some of this flat plastic, and then I'm going to put that on either ends to keep the resin in there, because obviously the resin will go right to the edge and we want to keep that nice and closed in. Right, so I've cut out these bits of plastic and I'm gonna glue gun them down here. Not 100% sure about attaching to this bit of the wood, so maybe I will try to just get a straight line there, and somehow maybe going to be taping it to the wood. I don't know, I'll give that a go. Doing these various resin projects, I've found that having a glue gun is essential. It becomes your best friend. So here I'm gluing up this plastic and then running a bead of glue down the wood so that I don't get spills of resin outside of that. That pretty much forms a dam and will mean that the resin can just sit slightly above the wood. That gives me something to be able to then sand down to. I've also found that duct tape, or sometimes known as 100-mile-an-hour tape, is a great resource to have on hand as well. Now this is good for trying to seal up your artwork like I've done here, just to give it a little bit of an extra insurance to help prevent resin spills. It's getting exciting, just about time for resin. Now what I'm just doing here is ensuring that those X-wing wings are not too high. Worst thing you'd want would be for them to be above that wood level line, and then you'd have to sand them down, and I'm not sure how you'd fix it actually. So it's important to make sure that those wings were down so they were covered in resin. At this stage I'm about halfway through the project and it's time to put all that resin there. Now this is a deep cast resin, which means that it takes a good 3 or 4 days to do its initial cure. Because it cures slowly, it has that extra time to be able to release any air bubbles, and that means that you can get a really clear resin. purpose for this initial resin pour is to go to about halfway, so that when that resin cures I can put those lasers in to then be able to do the second and final pour to encase everything. So this X-Wing model that I've got here, I managed to get from a Lego advent calendar that my family had given me prior to Christmas. Each day you got a new little Lego piece to open and assemble, and this was one of them. What it did not have though was these red rods, which you could use as the lasers or the torpedoes. And I was very lucky that my next door neighbour is really into his Lego, and he was able to donate to me these two little red lasers. So I'm just using some UV resin here to be able to stick that down. Because it's clear, when you do that next layer of resin, you're not going to be able to see where you've put the UV resin. It will just all blend in. Right, time for the final coat of resin, or final layers of resin, and this one I'm going to take that all the way to the top. It's going to fill in between those bits of plastic and the 3D print, and this will just encase everything nicely in that final lot of resin. One of the big enemies of resin is dust, and so once I'd poured this, it was quite important to make sure we didn't get any dust on there, and so I've used this clear container to sit over top and help prevent any dust from landing in the resin. So unfortunately we had some leakage, but that's okay because the majority of the resin set perfectly fine, but this has leaked out under the bottom. What I'm hoping though is that that's pretty sealed. I've got that resin bleed into the wood here, but that should sand off. So at this stage it's just a matter of getting everything ready for sanding, so that's pulling off all the tape, all the clear bits of plastic I've used, as well as getting rid of any of the glue gun glue that's on there. So now it's time for sanding. And I've tried to speed this up as much as possible, either by speeding it up on the footage here or by cutting out huge chunks, because this literally took hours and hours. So I'm using my belt sander just to get rid of all the bulk amount of resin to get it all level with the wood, and then it's onto the orbital sander to start going through the grits of sandpaper. So starting off at 60, then going to 80, 120, 240, and then into wet sanding. So here we've got some 600 and I'm wet sanding that at 600, bit of a hand sand. I've then got some 1200, and then I've stepped it up to 3000 with these little 3000 sanding discs that I've got an attachment on my drill. Thank goodness that sanding's done. As I said, hours and hours of sanding. Anyway, on to the finishing part. So I'm just using some CRC plastic polisher here, and I've got a buffing pad on my orbital sander which I'm using to go and polish the resin so it's beautiful and shiny. This is now finished and sanded, and so now I'm just going to give it a coat of wax. This is a food safe wax, and this should become quite a cool little Star Wars serving board. I'm using a food safe wax here by Gillies. It's made of beeswax as the base, and it's a really nice wax actually. I've used it on a number of chopping boards and serving boards, and it just really brings out that wood characteristics and protects the wood from any food stains. I like to do 2 coats on serving board, so putting 1 coat on, letting it dry for 24 hours, and then putting a 2nd coat in. This project really was a labour of love for me. As I said earlier in the video, I love Star Wars, and it was a pleasure to be able to design this, incorporate the Lego, and then produce this finished board. It allowed me to utilise a few of the skills I had, so 3D design and designing this tray. I was able to use my skill set I've learnt with resin, and also some woodworking involved in there too. This is also not for sale or a gift for anyone else, this is for me, so I'll be using this for dinner parties and Christmas and those sorts of things. I'll be able to bring this out and we can use this as it's intended, as a serving board. So that kind of wraps up this Star Wars Lego serving board creation. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, hit subscribe if you're not already, and click that notification bell so you can see more videos like this. Until next time, keep creating.